Welcome to the platform here at the Bergen Public Library again. For the last time this season, as many of you know, Platform is the lecture series here at the Bergen Kunsthall, and this whole autumn we have been moving the series here to this auditorium at the library. And now, on the occasion of the opening of a new exhibition with American artist Richard Tuttle, we are very pleased to be able also to present this talk by the artist together with Barbara Dawson as part of this series. I'll make my introduction fairly short. As most of you know, Bergen Kunsthall is closed and due to the renovation of our own building. And the exhibition program this season therefore consists of several projects in the city center of Bergen. One of them is actually here at the library with the Mexican artist Gabriel Kuri. Another one by Norwegian artist Knut Henrik Henriksen is still possible to see at the facade of Bergen Kunsthall. And the third exhibition just opened this afternoon at the Art Museums of Bergen by Richard Tuttle. And as these three exhibition periods overlap slightly, this weekend is actually the one time when all of them can be seen together. I thought that might be worth mentioning so that those of you who want to take a tour around the area can see all of them. This is the opportunity that you have. The library is also open on Sundays now, so it's possible to make a day of it. But now to the program of today. I guess most of you have been at the opening, so I will not repeat too much of what I already said there. But to make a very short introduction, this is the first solo exhibition by Richard Tuttle in Norway, which we are extremely pleased to be able to present. And as mentioned, it takes place over at the Art Museums, spread across the second floor of the Lysverket building. In 3 rooms on this floor, the exhibition takes form of a series of breaks in the art historical narrative of the museum. And in the exhibition, Richard is showing 12 notebooks, all made in 2010, seen together in one of the spaces, and divided between 2 smaller spaces, as well as on the outside of Bergen Kunsthall, 5 new metal sculptures are presented. And these sculptures have all been made by Richard this week. But now we are very happy that Barbara Dawson, director of the Hugh Lane Dublin City Gallery, is joining us for this event. It's just a short introduction to her. She is the author and editor of several books and texts on modern and contemporary art. She has curated several exhibitions with the work of artists such as Francis Bacon, Richard Hamilton, Julian Opie, just to name a few. And importantly for today's occasion, she was together with Michael Dempsey, the curator of a major exhibition by Richard Tuttle called Triumphs at the Hugh Lane in 2010. So please welcome Barbara and Richard.
So thank you very much, Steiner, and thank you very much to Solvier, Steiner, and the Kunsthall for inviting me here, and I think for Richard, inviting Richard to do the fantastic solo exhibition. So we
being on TV.
Yeah. How do I get to the first slide? Sorry about that. Arrow down. Oh, no, that's not the first slide. The first slide is Triumphs. No, it's not there. Oh. Okay. Well, we have, by way of introduction to Richard, and some of you have had the pleasure of seeing the exhibition today. It's a work in progress since the mid-1960s, and there is no doubt that when you look at a work of Richard Tuttle's, it isn't something that is the ordinary. It is something other. There is no doubt about that. It's something perhaps captivating in scale, coming out of a tradition of late modernism and minimalism, very small, always has another side to it, an evolution in it. And it's a work that will not go away. It's not a work you can take in a glance. Sometimes people have called it very odd or weird, but it also seems to capture certain essences, or it tries to bring into the visible, or we were talking yesterday about what's invisible. And I think it's fair to say it can be a strange work, and it's also a marvelous work. So, so moving on from there, we invited Richard to do an exhibition with us in Dublin called Triumphs. And my first slide here is arrow down. Now, Richard, I have it here. Can you see it there? Yeah. So what's amazing, it was at the time, Richard was, you will tell us about your research at the time. You were in the Augustine. I'll just read it out. It's Dear Barbara, apparently Petrarch wrote a book of poems called Triumphs, which set the artist off. Must find that book. All best, Richard.
Thank you all for coming. I think Barbara's directing us in a way where the exhibition itself is considered, and I think in my work, you don't exhibit unless you need to. That the exhibition is part of a larger thing, and that in this case, and I also think it's true with upstairs, the sense is that there's already something there, and you have to find it. And in finding it, how it's there is that it's not yet visible, but it's there. And then the process of making an exhibition is both learning what is there and refining what is there. So, for example, I think we thought it was quite arrogant to call our exhibition Triumphs, but it's really coming from a deep historical tradition, and the word triumph was perhaps best used by the great Italian 13th century, 14th century poet, Petrarch, who wrote a book of poetry called Triumphs, and each poem is subtitled then The Triumph of Love, The Triumph of Night, The Triumph of Religion, The Triumph of many, many different things. So it's it's been used as a literary form, also in the visual form, which became part of the exhibition. It was used at a time when artists wanted to make larger prints, and so they would paste a couple pieces of paper together originally, and that would create a long, sort of almost like a parade. And that use of triumph goes back to the way the triumph was used historically when the Romans conquered the Egyptians or conquered the North Africans, and they would drag the trophies and the prisoners back to Rome and make this parade that was a triumph. So our use of that title was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a little bit referring to actual triumph and feeling that we have deserved triumphs. And I think also came from a good friend of mine saying one day, everybody, this famous collector named Herb Vogel, yeah, who said, everybody needs their triumphs these days.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is... So when Richard sent this email to me about Petrarch and triumphs, and then we got over our sort of vague shyness and being cheeky and calling our exhibition Triumphs, as you can see behind you, is the Parliament House, which is the gallery where the Hugh Lane is now, Dublin City Gallery, the Hugh Lane. It's an 18th century building built by James Caulfield, who's the first Earl of Charlemont. James Caulfield was the European that translated Petrarch's poetry into English. And his manuscripts of Petrarch's poems are in the Royal Irish Academy, one of the oldest antiquarian libraries in Europe. And so I couldn't believe, so Richard talked about triumphs of Petrarch, and there is Lord Charlemont. So when Richard came to Dublin, we brought him to the library where you could see Petrarch's, the manuscripts translating Petrarch's triumphs into English. So we definitely had to have the exhibition in Dublin. So it was beginning to knit before anything was realised.
Has anyone read Petrarch?
His love poetry of Laura. Has anybody called Laura here?
Yeah. No, it's and that in fact was part of the fun, because we whereas maybe in the 19th century he was famous and everybody read Petrarch at one point or another, like in today's world nobody reads Petrarch, and so this, I don't know, this cheekiness went, and I mean, it was sharing that anybody who came to the exhibition could share a sense of triumph, and yet there were parts of it where it was so obscure that nobody, no matter what they did, could share in the triumph. So that was kind of a framework for making an exhibition, or this kind of exhibition.
And so, this exhibition, for us, was the second exhibition of Richard's in Dublin. But it was the big museum exhibition. He had never done a big solo museum exhibition. So one of the points of reference that I wanted to make was to have a context, because I didn't quite know what Richard was going to do. And I just thought that we really probably needed to kind of have, if it's going to be this big show, that if he decided to put, one piece of rope on every second wall with one pin through it, that was what Richard was going to do. So I thought that maybe we could carve out a little bit where Michael Dempsey, my head of exhibitions, and I could actually curate a little bit of a show, so that it might be a sort of a starting point, or if you like, the board, the diving board going in. And so Richard quite liked that idea. But we very much wanted it to be his show. For us, some of our curatorial, I think our curatorial policy really is, once we get the outline of what we really want to show, like we want to do Richard Tuttle, we want to do a solo show, we want an engagement by the artist, then we don't really have the end game written down. So we don't have the end game, and I really like that. I like that openness. It's a bit nerve-wracking, it's a bit frightening at times, but I'm not going to say this show is going to... I allowed the show to do that, and I have to say it's one of Richard's great shows, and it's only now, and thanks to the Kunsthalle and everybody here, it allows us to sort of revisit and say, crikey, that was a really good show. Yeah. But so here is Richard in an emerald green shirt with the nod to the Emerald Isle that Ireland is known, as he arrives one day late. Yeah, he just missed the bus. So these are the things. So we'll just go, we'll start with the exhibition that Michael and I did, and this is one of the works. Now, getting work wasn't, we tried our best to get work, all of the work we wanted, but and it's not chronological here. So this is L1, and this is from 1981. Richard was known, of course, to do letters of the alphabets, letters, some of them which were recognizable, some which weren't. There's also a play here with the vertical and the horizontal. And beside it, as you can see, is one of the 18th century fireplaces in Parliament House. Would you like to talk about this work, or?
Well, I think Barbara and I spoke before that we really invite participation, audience participation. There will be a question and answer at the end, but if someone would like to say something, or please feel free at any moment.
And we can go back as well to the work to look at it.
Let's see. As we look at these images, it will be quite amazing how the kind of work I make relates to this architecture from the 18th century. And this particular architect is not, Adams, but it's the next truly greatest architect of the period, and so even, for example, this fireplace is outstanding, and I think probably I feel my work is also outstanding, and so that's why it goes together so well.
So, and we thought so too. It certainly makes you look, and it's always this idea of the looking. I'm not taking something in, and of course with Richard's work now, which is so enriched or from a lifetime of working, there's always those hidden bits that sometimes can't be found, but certainly do reward the looking. So in the next room, we also in this room we have this wonderful illuminated work. Perhaps it's over, and in the if you can see in the distance beyond the door, you have the two blocks from 1970 in the other room. And so we loved this. We loved this contrast, and the two blocks are on a wall that's about 5 meters long. So they're the only two. But we did that, so we thought we could do that. But I'm just going to show you a close up of Perhaps It's Over, which is a vertical work and a complex work.
Yeah. I was speaking publicly about my work recently, and one of the things you can see here is the vast number of types of work. You can actually see through the doorway, right in the center of the doorway, that little 2 blocks piece that Barbara and Michael gave finally a wall that I'd always wanted to see it on, because that aspect of my work is, I think, comes from when I was starting 20 years old or something, and my dealer was great Betty Parsons, who talked about these larger and larger paintings that were being made. And she said, throwing her arms out, she said, well, the artists are painting the expanding universe. Of course the paintings have to be large. And I looked at her, and it was kind of a ridiculous position. She's quite a great lady, and her arms are spread out like that. And I just thought, on the spot that, well, there must be an equal and opposite energy, and that's going to be my interest, So the works can eat up vast amounts of wall space. But the thing is, they don't, they're really about making space. They're not about taking space. And I'm very proud of that part of it. But I must say, even I I've never had the courage that Barbara and Michael. See, that's a good photograph where all those, it's such a simple thing. It's just 2 blocks of wood and some string, but the nature of that simple form that everybody could make, or you've seen it 100 times or whatever, allows extraordinary complexity and even infinite. And so as art, the problem is that little object has to be equally, have equal interest as that might ever happen in that huge wall. Whatever happened, if it was occupied by a Picasso, that this little thing had to be as interesting. And it does take a certain, a person who's willing to take a leap, to see and not merely look. And my work has certainly been attacked by people who come up and say, you know, do you understand the value of real estate in this part of town? You know, things like that. It's, I find, I mean, because art is also, you know, is built on contradictions or sustains contradictions that can't be sustained in life. And so I mean, and a lot of writing about my work emphasizes the humility or humbleness of the materials or the smallness and so on. But people who really look at it, there's no more arrogant artist on earth than me, you know, and that to take up, you know, that amount of space, because that's the art too. It's not passive. The works bring and energize that field. And just between us here, I can say the reason I can get away with that, and it's not, I mean, in this case, it's not only about me, but that we rejected the traditional frame and supported that rejection by claiming that our frame is space. And so when Barbara and Michael did this, they were simultaneously showing people the success of that strategy, but they were also they were also challenging the strategy, because if it didn't work, I mean, everyone here in the room just heard Barbara say, well, what if Richard put these three sort of, and I didn't do that, but they did it, you know. I lost my nerve, but they made up more than my lack of.
It was really successful. That's the room that it was in, and I just think of one quote of Richard's: "The art experience is somehow beyond the frontal lobe experience. For me, the kind of art experience when you go beyond the cognitive level is the big hit." Which I think. And now, just on the,
does anyone agree with that?
It brings up the point of instinct, and Richard talks about, there's a beautiful Courbet near the work that's showing in the Kunstmuseum. It's a landscape, a Courbet landscape, and you've mentioned instinct in Courbet. Also Francis Bacon, and we've got Richard to like Francis Bacon a lot.
Yeah.
Francis Bacon speaks a lot about instinct. Not that he's not talking about seeing, it's just like heightening the instinct, and probably the instinct of what direction to go in. And the other thing is also series. He sees things in series, and you see in Richard's work the sculpture that's being installed outside. It's rhythmic, and there's something very instinctual about how you approach it and the pattern that comes in the work. But just going back, the one on the left is called Two, and it's also an early work and a very earthy work. It's a very kind of earthy with the beautiful curved span. And one of the drawings in this exhibition upstairs, on the left-hand wall as you walk in, seems to return to that sort of somewhat of that composition there.
Yeah.
Does it come out of it? It sort of comes out of course, a spatial concern, and has a tiny sort of hint of maybe a influence or before of something like the concerns of shadow and architecture, or maybe Ellsworth Kelly, or you know, it's just a. It's 65.
I think this. You know, there are historic cycles, and that this work, for example, was at the beginning of a historic cycle, and so it's like an archaic, and it has implicit a lot of ideas, a lot of new ideas, and but it's say, I mean, Ellsworth, or to the Ellsworth would be part of like a conclusion of the last historic cycle, and but the important thing with this for me is that it's completely revolutionary, but it's a quiet revolution, and somehow the 20th century or recent human history is so. And the presence of revolution is necessary, but it's always so noisy and so messy and so bloody and so but this was such a fundamental creation of a new world, and it just essentially a piece like this was it's a hollow box, and it's made by drawing a hand-drawn line that is then cut out, and that line is then traced with a thin piece of plywood, so that at the edges you have this very slight undulation, and in fact between the orange and the green, that line is shared. And this that's the means of a enormous revolutionary gesture, and we, for example, feel very comfortable still about not recognizing a extreme difference between the kind of art that went before and this kind of art, but I find how to say that. Well, I think I'm just going to jump and let that's certainly open for any kind of comment from the audience, but that the color, these pieces were an attempt to get the right color. So that orange and that green, probably, they've been painted 40, 50, 60 times, until, and that was the kind of practice. And I think I gave these pieces up because I realized I could never get the color that I wanted, I really wanted. So I had to, that showed me that if I wanted color, I had to find another way to get it, yeah.
And that's just that room. So on the little piece on the end wall, dark extension. So really what you see in that room is work from 65, and then dark extension, which is a wonderful, again, vertical piece on the end wall. When we were in New York with Richard, we went to, that's Michael Dempsey on the right, we're back to the green shirt, we know which day it is from the shirt, but Speroni Westwater was showing Village 5, and this was a manifesto that Richard had created originally for the Drawing Centre in New York, and after several, we had been to see Herb Vogel that day, which was absolutely amazing, but Herb has a very furry cat, and I'm allergic to cats, so after about an hour I had to leave, and I start to stagger because it just really is almost like a point. So trying to get to Spine Village 5 was quite difficult, but we eventually got there. And so with that manifesto of Richard's about drawing, it's drawing vibration, drawing motion, drawing light blue, drawing shadow as concrete, and of course I've forgotten the fifth one, but I can't remember the fifth one. Of course I would. But what Richard was talking about is canon and breaking the canon. And of course that's what has to be done all the time, is breaking the canon. So we saw Village 5, which is showing shadow as concrete, and this was the installation of it. So we might talk a little bit. That's showing the beginning of the painting of Village 5, which is showing shadow as part of the work, as part of the material part of the work.
Well, this again, I have to express my amazement at Barbara and Michael for taking this project on. The work involves various pieces, which I think we'll see in further photographs, but it's a tremendous amount of work. It's more than I would want to take on. I've done it myself several times, so I know what. But then it became almost in a way the symbol of the exhibition, that this pattern turned out on buses going through Dublin, and it was wrapped the columns in front of the Douglas Hyde. Got on the cover of
the Douglas Hyde is the Hugh
I'm
Lane.
sorry.
Don't worry about that.
Really,
Douglas Hyde is
really
the university.
terrible.
Museum.
Yeah. Oh God.
It's all right. We forgive you. But it did become
this. Slipping over into the this visual, the visual is. I guess I'm trying to support the visual, and so forgive me if I make mistakes in the verbal side of things. No, I don't know why I thought of that. I'm so happy with the exhibition here, but it made me think that years when I was young, I realized that being an artist or being involved with this sort of creative life, that it's like climbing a mountain, and I thought that, well, you can go as high on this mountain as you can suffer the humiliation, and that's like when I get what I want, or I see what I want, like in these. Here in Bergen, the sense of humiliation. This is also part of the pun of this triumph, because it is a triumph for anyone to get what they want. But I find when I get what I want, my actual feeling, emotion, is utter humiliation. And so, it doesn't matter if I call the Hugh Lane Douglas Hyde or the Douglas Hyde here, because as long as it's humiliating.
So, but the manifesto is, there is of course the history of the shadow, which Victor Storchicha has written a short history of the shadow as concrete. I hope you won't mind saying, Bacon says it when he's looking at a Moy Bridge and he's painting, he says, make concrete the shadow. Here Richard is showing that the shadow is concrete, and we're going to just talk about that because we're going to show you a wire piece that he also recreated for us in this. So I'm very glad that he was very humble, but I think he looks awfully well against. And that's Charlemont House was designed by William Chambers, the famous neoclassical architect. So he's standing beside a Chambers mantle.
I didn't take that in before, but that kind of swag on the fireplace and how it's reflected in the curve. It's really,
So here we have Richard working. He's installing now, with Village 5, there's some very interesting, this is a sculptured piece that goes to the floor. We didn't have many floor pieces in the show, but this was one of those pieces. And then we have that's Richard Happy with his installation of the floor piece, which was concrete then. So perhaps just quickly, the relief, the sculptured relief at the top, would you like to?
It's kind of funny. I don't know if everybody took in the fact that there was this. In New York, we have something called the Drawing Center, and it's quite significant because drawing has had importance. And when it was founded, the director who founded it came to me and wanted to pick my brain about drawing. And I thought, well, if you want, there has to be an exhibition. No, I can't say, there are words, but we talked for 6 hours because she wanted to talk, and so, and then I thought, well, it was natural to make an exhibition. But the Drawing Center went on for almost 25 years, or maybe even 30 years, and I never had an exhibition there. So when I was invited, in a certain level, it was just the same, trying to say the same thing that I had said 30 years before in that 6 hours walking through Central Park. And drawing is it's somehow it's difficult. What's difficult in drawing is that when you draw, it's already reveals itself. So in a sense, every time you make a drawing, real drawing hides on that. And so the real challenge in this exhibition was not to let that happen, and then to see what real drawing is. So Barbara mentioned the catalog. We made quite an amazing catalog and called it Manifesto. And each, in the exhibition, you had 6 villages, what were called villages, and each one was composed of a sculpture and 2 sets of drawings. What we're looking at was the sculptural element. For example, this piece has a fluorescent light on the back wall that I find I don't know that. I mean, for example, when I did this, you have to direct it. It can be directed upward, it can be directed out, it could even be directed backwards or any sort of way. But there was only one way that it would work in terms of that, and that was for me one of these. I mean, this moment of how like, I'm sure all of you have been in that situation where probably you liked to draw when you were a kid, or somebody saw your drawing, and because it was good, they said, oh, you should be an artist, something like that. And that certainly happened to me, and I did want to be an artist, but the artist they were talking about was not the artist I wanted to be. And so this, because it's art, okay. So, it was, fundamentally my point was something that if drawing can be what it actually is, we can see the difference between what what was it, like the code, or the it's like a almost like an academy. Oh, shoot, I wish this is what I say. The verbal. And this is the verbal thing. It's not really here. I shouldn't be. Anyway, but I do need to say that each one, for example, that you can't draw a shadow. I mean, if drawing could be what it is, you could draw a shadow, but because drawing is not allowed to be what it is, then you can't draw a shadow. And this, oddly, I just heard for the first time, was very similar to what Francis Bacon was saying as well, because, I mean, anyone who really gets into the work probably finds that out. It's a very upsetting day because, everyone has told you the opposite all your life,
Yeah. And to go on with this, we want to show you these close-up. That there are some of the drawings in frames. Now, the very interesting thing about Village is that the frames are actually artworks in themselves. They're not containers. In fact, the works are pinned to the wall, and then the frames are put around them, which is most unusual. And then there's also this lovely series of drawings that are pinned to the wall, and the placement of them is very much a Richard Tuttle thing. So this is just a very odd perspective on it, but just gives you an idea of the laying out and the intensity of thinking about drawing, not only just the Village 5 on the wall, which is, I just showed you how it was built up in layers, and that's what also is referenced here, is that a shadow isn't just a blob, it's a layer of concrete thinking and concreteness in the sense of drawing for Richard. And then these wonderful smaller drawings here, and I'm just going to give you, sorry about the one on the left, that's chocolate, it just got in there by mistake, but just keep, this one, just move on there, he wasn't meant to be there, or that. Okay, but that's April, that's not meant to be there. Now, we're back to Village 5, there's a detail. But what I want to show you is this one here. And you see that the wall comes through through the frames. And again, this is another way, a new way of looking. Framing now is, oh God, if we use Francis Bacon again, you'd probably kill me. But you know the way he uses rectangles behind his paintings? He says it's to nail down the image. But what Richard is doing here is he's layering the framing, and you'll see this layering coming in, concentric squares evolving, and it's just absolutely beautiful to look at. So everything has its place, and everything is coming through, and it's reinforcing the beauty of the drawing, that it's allowed its place. So both the frame, the drawing on the wall, the drawing on the paper, all come through. So
I like that it's nothing's overdone.
No. and so I
It's
just.
I mean, it's so easy to take an idea like this and overdo it, but it's like
Yeah, it's just absolutely, and that's knowing when to stop.
It's over.
Yeah, yeah. And now these are again different. The wall doesn't show through in these works. Simple. I like these simple frames very much. And there you have, very, very curious work. And just showing you through these because it just really informs what the beautiful exhibition here. So we're just going to go through them. And then these are and then these are pinned. Now the pinning of these to the wall was at a certain height, and the sequence was, of course, Richard's. And the point is with Richard, there is a Tuttle height, as we learned. So we're there. I don't know what we're doing. We're pointing to something. But we learned, Michael and I learned a lesson with Object, or one here in 1981, which we loved. A beautiful little work. You start to go, they all have their own personality. And so Michael's very tall. And this is the thing with installation and curation. It depends on your height and who's looking at something. So I'm not very tall, and but he thought it would look lovely, and I absolutely agreed, really high up and to the left. And so it makes people not come into a room and have to look at it and all of that. But no, it was absolutely. So Richard arrives, and after 2 days he comes. We have to do something here. And I go, yeah, what? No, we cannot rebuild Parliament House. No, we can't do that. Or we can't. No, it was to move this down. It was absolutely wrong, this place. But we learned. So this is the final room, and also in that room is this great Lonesome Cowboy styrofoam. I thought this was final frontier work.
That was fabulous.
Fantastic work. Most, the idea about the pioneering and the big works and sort of the Wild West and grasping it. So this is Richard's response to, the frontier land.
I just want to say, one reason I love Barbara is, for me, even from the first time we met, I sense that this is somebody who's born to show art. It's just, in every cell, and I think your sense that you can see what I'm speaking of, but in this image of you're trying to get something into the world that's never been there, and it's really a struggle, and there aren't mostly enemies along the struggle, and very few friends, and then you meet someone like Barbara, and she's like so supportive, and a piece like that, I don't know when does it say a date, but that's what it was, 20 years old or something like that, and it was never ever shown correctly, and the.
Until here, it was shown all right here.
Well, it's some. I mean, I keep out this image that artwork is like music and a composition, in the sense that it's nothing until it's played. I mean, it just sits in some drawer, and you need a player, and when the player puts as much as Barbara does into their work, then it's going to come out better.
Well, we do try, don't we? That's great. So these are now Pearls is on the left, and then we have Trout on the right. Two beautiful works. I have a close up of this work, because it's called Trout, and yet to me it looked like a bird soaring. And then, of course, if you look down on it, it could be a river flow or something cutting across the horizontal. It's one of those magnificent works that's so simple and humble, and yet it's absolutely beautiful. And again, the verbal, it's almost instinctually beautiful. The contrast of the colours, the shape of it, the lightness of it, the way it moves across the room. I just thought it was this way. It just sort of soars across the room. So it was one of the works I really loved. Still keep looking at it and talking about it, but it's that sort of between cognizance and vision, or people talk about Richard, there's a lot of in-betweenness. In-betweenness is used a lot, but I just think there's, perhaps for me, that was something that I knew was in the world and I had never seen it materialized. Or do you know something that you relate to and you go, yes? It's almost just been circling around in your imagination, and then something makes it concrete. But that was, so we finished that. Oh yes, in this room, Richard also, we were so excited. He agreed to recreate a wire piece from the 1972, and these wire pieces, a lot of writers say it's towards dematerialization, like it goes the furthest, because he uses shadow as a real element alongside pencil lines and wire. And people like Thomas McEvilley say after this, Richard becomes more abundant. The work starts to become rich again. But this is wire piece. So and then now this is the wire piece. With the shadow. It's just difficult to show it, but I thought I'd just go through how it happens. Here's Richard drawing, and then he starts, you pin it out.
Tracing it.
And tracing it with the wire, and as you see, little hammers going through, and then hammers it, stretches it again, drawing, and stretching it out. It goes down. I don't know if these are quite in sequence. Dolores helped me, and I think she's just got a little, but it goes down there, you see, and this is a great one. And he brings it down to the end. You see, crosses over, and then brings it back up. I think these are not in sequence, but anyway, just to give you an idea. And then when it's finished, the piece that springs back up, we didn't get as many photographs of that as we wanted, and it's sort of taut around, and then the pieces that are allowed to be loose spring out from the wall, and then they create the shadows on the wall. And it's very, very simple, but it's actually really lovely because it slightly quivers. Do you make many wire pieces now?
I tend not to like them because to do them, they're so fragile.
Yeah.
And it's, even though people love them, sooner or later they're because they're it's an arrangement where they're only 3 or maybe 4 elements, and they don't work if there's any other element. But I think part of my work, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but the idea that one moment is equal to eternity, and so if the piece, for me, if the piece exists for one moment, that's all that's necessary because that's eternity, and maybe that's my own screwed up mentality, but it's. I think as years have gone on, I think what's great about these pieces is that they, because the maker, everything I'm doing is trying to get out of the work, and that was the first question I asked myself is, how can you get out of your own work? And what happened is that in getting out, which is done every time one is made until today, but you actually create a place for the viewer. And the sad thing is in this world that we don't often find a place for us. It's always occupied by something else or whatever, and that these pieces give this sense of truth that somewhere, somehow, but I think, if I say truth, I'm talking about the truth of art, and that one reason art is so valuable or so important for me is that it can give you a place your experience of it can provide a place for you that you cannot find in the real world, in the non-art world.
I'm going to come back to that. So that we move on to, and I think most of us probably would never want to be in a place where it's a non-art world. But so the more that it, as we say, becomes invisible or inextricably bound up in the world, which it should be, is the better. So we move on to Richard's exhibition. This is his red-blue series here, and that's, again, height for Richard, very important. And we're looking at the work. But this work here, made in 2002, and if read from the left to the right, it's sort of, you see this square is empty in the center, and then as it moves across, it actually starts to fill up. Is there a commentary on kind of evolvement or sort of enrichment or sequential evolution or the sort of series?
I think I love simplicity and I love complexity. And so in a work, I'm trying to give both of those. And so I find each work is built with thematic material. And what I like is to have as many and as rich levels of thematic material. And, we're talking about the symbolic, the world, not, and so sometimes I call these pieces my 9/11 pieces. This, 2002. It's just we lived next to the trade centers, and it was a big deal, and somehow one had to deal with that. But the pieces were also, I felt, this notion of living in a closed, we're like an anthill, like human, that what we built socially and culturally and civilization, maybe civilization is the best word. The civilization is in the end a kind of anthill, and everything that could go on in an anthill is what you're going to experience in life, and that's it. This guy's going to poke you in the nose, and that one's going to run away with your wife, and and so what, But the thought that was interesting is there any way you can see out or see beyond that anthill? Is there a window somewhere? And so I think these, in terms of a structure of archaic, classic, Baroque, Rococo, I felt the best place to find this window was between the Baroque and the Rococo. So on that level, each one of these is gives the viewer, I think, something that they might see if they could see beyond the anthill. And then by putting them in a row like this, just enriched that. But also, contradicted. That's the other. Some people say my work is has humor, or it's funny, and which is fine. Why not? And it should be, but it should be also serious and funny. And because, again, art for me is not like the world. It's not like life, but it's the greatest tool we have for life, and especially if it's employed is with skill, and sensibility and sensitivity.
And so that's just, and there they are close up. beautiful.
Yeah.
And then beside that, then
That first one is the orange one that's the wall behind, and there's just a little brown kind of plastic that goes along the bottom, and that's I guess another kind of pun about this, because, well, if you can see the wall, you start from, this idea of, do you start from the beginning, or you start from the end, or you're going forward, you're going backwards, does it make a difference? But this is Okay. Like orange, I must say, for me, because color. There's a lot of different kinds of color being used, and for example, the blue and the red are a particular kind of color, and the orange is another kind of color, and so this piece allows me, hopefully, someone kind of jarring, but then surprisingly fitting in. But orange is, and the way it's used here, is I think is the color of the future. That's like ahead, and so on that level, I don't know if I don't think that's very much in fashion at the moment, but I once read a most amazing text about the symbolic use of color in Gauguin. Yeah, and it's. I'm not putting myself in that camp, but I for example, the Notebook show with Steiner this afternoon, we just talked a little bit about. Those pieces are available for the viewer to investigate, and one of the investigations I would hope people would take advantage of is the symbolic use of color, because it's a lot of fun, and if there's nothing on TV as interesting as that.
It's certainly colour is a huge component in the work. Now, this is a series called Cycles, and Richard writes that when he was invited to show at the Hugh Lane, he was very pleased because he wanted to correct an earlier installation he had done, about 15 years earlier in the Douglas Hyde. The Douglas Hyde is allowed to be mentioned now. Douglas Hyde is the university.
The site of a disaster. I can't get it out of my head. Yeah,
it's the university museum, and it also has a very, very good contemporary program. But Richard was invited by the curator there, John Hutchinson, to exhibit Cycles, and when he arrived, he realized, oh my God, it shouldn't be vertical, it should be horizontal. So this was the chance to correct that mistake. And these are made in a material that we're not so familiar with, but American aspenite. And they're really wonderful because you know, what are they? The birds. And this is Richard again putting these works together with Chris. So they're not very big. Key and I were talking about this, and we were just saying, they're quite small, but they do have a powerful presence. There's the pale blue fourth cycle, and what photographer doesn't move the blocks of the sponge before they take a photograph? I mean, it's just amazing. But, so these are the cycles. But for instance, these, what is it? Is it a man? Is it is it sort of a bull, the clown? And then these lovely senses. I hear some of the suggestion of the vertical, so cut across again by the horizontal. It's a beautiful one. And this. And then this, which is really playful and quite funny. And then the final one. Originally, Richard had placed the cat hopping off the society. I'm sorry, this one's a bit dark. But what was wonderful about this show is we had time for him to come back, and this is the way it ended up, and its relationship to orange, green, red. Sorry, I always call it. Why do I do the orange? It's blue, red, orange.
Blue,
Maybe it's because our flag is green, white, and orange. But so now, what's wonderful about cycles, what I loved about cycles, is like Richard pushing the boundaries of ambiguity, pushing the boundaries of what an artwork is, pushing the boundaries of how you look at an artwork, particularly how you deal with space. Now, we always were sort of aligning with, the classical spaces. We've now moved into the contemporary wing, which opened in 2006. And what Richard has done here has just kept going, out and in through the spaces, which to me was so... it was really liberating, and we've done it since. You don't sort of stop here. You make a sequence through into another space. So they just looked fantastic.
Yeah,
I just thought you'd like to see those. And then distance was also in that room. But I'm going to move on, Richard.
Okay.
And this is the Richard box. These were always, we wondered, why was it orange? What do we find in there when we opened? And then there's probably a couple of tools or something. But this was a work called compartmentalization. And if you do agree with the sort of the work becoming more abundant or Baroque-like or whatever, this was kind of a work that really, you went, what's going on here? What is going on here? It's just, I'll just show you the end. Is it, we read it this way, or do we read it that way? Or both ways?
Well, this one does seem to go from left to right, and so the one with the red pieces at the bottom is the end. The
end piece.
Yeah.
And for me, it sort of got fuller and fuller as it goes along down to the end piece.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a referential element starting at the beginning, but it's just, look, it's really strange.
Okay, strange. I like to say that. There you go. I guess I'm strange.
We love.
It's. I like being strange.
Well, we certainly like you being strange, because for the work is marvelous. But there's a little stick that comes out in the end one to the very right that seems to pop up here, and the one in the I'll have to go back here. No. Wrong way. This one. This is kind of strange because this is kind of strange because it's also cut out, and it's it's referencing femininity, it's referencing as you say, fullness and Baroque and. Does anyone here work like this? I'm assuming that most of the audience are artists. Is that true? Is that what?
No, it's. I think these pieces started out with the idea any given space or that's designated by a rectangle can be compartmentalized. That's where the title comes from. And that space that say it's barely suggested in the first one, and then the second one, it's clear you really confront the three different spaces that are available, and then it begins to morph and.
It morphs into the first three, or you can kind of give a bit of a lecture on it, but then it goes into this. Where's my rectangle there?
Well, I think what's going on there is somehow returning to. The first idea. A lot of. Don't know if. Musical composition in these pieces. This is a clear triumph piece because it's elongated and it's like a parade, and it's almost like, if you were sitting on the side of the street and you saw that first one, and you might say, oh, it might interest you, or you might have a response, and then you see the second one, the third one, and it's kind of well designed in that sense. If the last one, that's the sort of kickoff. But I think if you think about music and how one of the rules of music is that the original theme has to be returned to, but of course it's transformed. So a lot of poetry or the novel has this experiential. I think one thing I've learned is among artists, there are two kinds. They're the kind who's born knowing the rules, and they're the kind who are not born knowing the rules. And so, given that, your work, if you know the rules, then your work winds up playing with the rules and trying to do something unusual or different with the rules. But of course, to appreciate it, you have to be someone who knows the rules and to be able to see what's going on with the rules. And of course, one of the big ambitions that way is that you might be favored to be able to take the rule book or put another page in the rule book, because art is the kind of, like in life, for example, I really wouldn't like somebody to add another rule to the rule book, but we have enough already. But in art, anybody who can add another rule is like discovering a new planet or a new. It's an enormous achievement. Yeah.
I think that's probably one of the things that makes Richard. He not a fan of late modernism. Coming out of. It certainly is a liberation. I know certainly in Ireland, and I think in the UK as well. He's a huge hero for younger artists because of either creating more rules, or I would have thought maybe it's our Irish rebelness breaking all the rules, and so long as the canon are there. Right. So it was a great liberation.
Well, I'm sorry, but that is, the knowing the rules is one of the most delicious things. Is breaking, to break one that nobody has ever broken before. For example, that's really great.
You can see artists much younger than Richard, Francis Alise, but Richard really is kind of blazed the trail. I know we're nearly at the end, and Steiner is there. I'm just going to let you just go through these because there was the rest of the work. That's Richard there. This is in good health, and there's if we have time, but we're going to ask questions now. This, and because I wanted to show you some of the triumph. That's Rouen, but this theory, if we can ever get back to it, because I want to talk about they're painted plastic plates, and this is a beautiful work, an arm and a leg. You see it down at the end. A fantastic work. The different shapes, it just and it works. And then you that's a close up, an arm and a leg, and that's craft. Which they were shown separately, but then Richard decided that they should be shown together. And then these come in these later, the Triumph of Night, and these are in these different kind of frames. We've gone from the humble frame to a more box-like work, but we come back to that. But there was one really beautiful, they're all beautiful works, Triumph of Light, Zurich, and then this is the last room, and there you have Aspen, and then you have 4 quartets. And then this is Emma, which we might have time
that looks
to
great
Doesn't
at the
look
moment.
Great?
And so does
and this is for Ron, which is like this is a great story. Was he with Betty Parsons?
Mary Boone.
Mary Boone. It was Mary Boone, and it was your work as a tribute to. We won't say, but the central one is was the central one driving from New Mexico. So you see, it's like a highway, and the one on the right, is that New York?
I think it was, but that's this. Not to the way the mind works, but I keep seeing the Trade Center. That has like this. To exercise those demons, art is can function that way too, and so that it shows the way art would deal with that, because it both creates the image that it's destroying, and
I think it's great work. I always loved that work. And then we can't talk about prologue, but I think we have something about spring and summer, particularly. Oops.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
The
sort of like, and the second one there, the green one, has those concentric squares moving further out. And then we had our book series, Dogs in a Hurry. And I know at the end of this we have it there.
Oh, yeah.
Now this is the exhibition here, which I think is absolutely fantastic, because you see how solid it is, how robust. It's almost as if Richard has more energy now than he had 10 years ago. And it's almost as if the whole lot from the some great stories in our catalogue of when he was very young and rang Agnes Martin and started off and was catatonic and was thrown out of the all of that. And now this is really robust work, which I think is fantastic to see here.
It looks wonderful.
It really is. It's so, and then that was on the floor, but as usual with Richard, then he took it off the floor yesterday, and Steiner had to do that. But then you see these beautiful. This is just an incredible suite of work. It's just very rich. That's the best one of all. That's the Agnes Martin. Just at the end, Richard, of course, loved Agnes Martin, and we bought an Agnes Martin in 1982, just when you didn't have photography. I wasn't there at the time. And of course, the press had a field day, because the press loved something to ridicule, and because it didn't reproduce, they called it the blank canvas. And this went on for months and months, and the city wasting money on a blank canvas and a blank, oh my God. And now, of course, it's one of our pride and joy. So every time I have problems with them, I go, look at the blank canvas of 1982. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.